Hello, friends. I'd like to welcome you all to our final session offered by our colleagues from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. And there's lots of things we like about SPAN, but one of the things we like the best about SPAN is it's so easy for them just to walk down the street, or maybe they're actually driving in from their homes, who knows, and come and just talk to us and get us connected to all of the work that's happening at the CTC. It seems like you all have been in overdrive for the last 2 years. So thank you for that. And without further ado, I just wanted to introduce them in order of appearance. I'll let them tell you what they do at the commission. So David DeGear, Aaron Sullivan, Cheryl Hickey, Kara Mendoza, and also William Hattrick, who is going to pitch in, I think, if somebody has a question they can't answer. So thank you very much, colleagues from CTC. David DeGear.
Thank you. I also want to introduce Tim Weeks, who is our newest consultant. And to his right, hello, Swallow. I just want to give her a moment to swallow. Michelle Williams-George. All right, so we were asked to come and talk about the commission's role in policy.
Do you know if our slide is up? Okay. This doesn't, just so you know, this isn't running that. You have to do both. They're running.
Got it. Thank you. All right. So we were asked to come and talk about what is the CTC's role in policy and what are some current initiatives. And as someone who moved here from Wisconsin almost a year ago, I have gotten this crash course, and let me tell you, it is a whole lot different than other places. It's different. I mean, so it's hard to say better because in Wisconsin, there is one department, one state agency which is run by an elected state superintendent of public instruction. So kind of like here, there is no state school board. The governor has limited, and this is based on Supreme Court, state Supreme Court cases, has limited effect on education. If you remember the name Tommy Thompson, he wanted to set up his own Department of Education, but the state Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't do that. We got a constitutional office. So here, it really requires a lot of different agencies working together, which slows things down, but hopefully in the end, we come up with better products and better policy. Okay. I'm gonna give it to Aaron.
Thank you. And for those of you who don't know, and I think you're just assuming everyone's met you by now, David is our newest division director in professional services and has not even been with us for a year yet. Coming up on a year, but we're very happy to have him.
Still on probation.
Still on probation. So yeah, I'm Aaron Sullivan, and as I commented earlier, I kind of introduced myself, but I am currently an administrator in the professional services division. I work hand in glove with Cheryl Hickey in implementing the commission's standards and their adopted accreditation framework. But also very excited to kind of talk about this policy thing, because as I also mentioned earlier, I used to be in our Office of Governmental Relations. And I've loved both roles, but covering for OGR for the last month and a half has sort of reignited my excitement of all things sort of policy and legislative, but it's temporary. David is nodding. You're not going back to OGR. So I just want to talk a little bit about, I just added a slide to our slide deck. Sorry, Cheryl. So we're going to talk, we've been asked a little bit to talk about how educator preparation policy is set in California. And of course, we can really only talk about that from the perspective of the commission. I mean, we work with other bodies and we'll mention those, but this will be really talking about Who are the various entities, interest groups, state agencies, and other thought partners that affect education policy in the state of California. What is the CTC's role as part of that group of thought partners in our tremendous state? How, as part of its regular activities, does CTC develop and or influence education policy in California? And what are the limits of CTC's powers and authority in California, and how does that affect its role? So we'll kind of broadly cover that. And then at the end, we will talk about some current issues and policy topics that we're working on, most of which you already know about. I love this. All right. And then I have to change this one as well. Okay. So big question, who shapes policy, education policy in California? As David mentioned, there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of thought partners. We have a governor who will come with his own education policy ideas. We have a legislature, they will have their own ideas. Neither one of them alone can affect anything. They really do need to work together. And often they will call on all of us, to help them shape their ideas, to help them understand, because they're not the education experts, right? We all are. So, the legislature can introduce bills. Sometimes the governor can ask a legislative partner, like, I would like this to happen. You want to carry a bill for me? But only the governor can then in the end sign the bills. But they do a lot of work together to ensure, hopefully, that the bills that make it to the governor are things that he can approve. But of course, he does have veto power. So who else in the state of California can also influence or shape policy? So I mentioned again, the governor, he will have his own visions. He has opportunities through the budget that he introduces to signal what some of his priorities are in the state of California. He can offer direction, maybe suggestions to his own cabinet of individuals and agencies across the state with whom he has some influence. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But for instance, the commission, our commissioners are appointed by the governor. So, our next boss for me, after Dr. Mary Vixie Sandy, is the governor of the state of California. We don't have an other elected official between us and him. TK-12 education partners can also influence and help shape policy in the state of California. And these individuals that I'm talking about, we mentioned up here, districts, county offices of education, but also groups like superintendent groups, school board groups like CSBA, we've got CCTE, we've got, okay, I could go through the alphabet soup that we have in California, but you're aware of a lot of those folks. We have IHE institutions and their groups. So, the UCs and the CSUs and AICCU and, even the further breakout within AICCU of, the private nonprofits and the private for-profits. Other interest groups, right? So bilingual interest groups, dyslexia interest groups. I mean, it's California. There is an interest group or many interest groups for any topic, I think, that you could think of in education. Other state agencies can obviously affect education policy. A big one, obviously, is the Department of Education. They have an elected official, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, that oversees that organization, and the State Board of Education, which is also appointed by the governor, has a big role in affecting education policy in the state of California. And then really last, but certainly not least, our constituents. So individuals like us outside our professional roles who are citizens of the state of California, who have lawmakers that represent us. Individuals like that often call their lawmakers and say, I am having a problem with something. I'm a teacher. I want to be a teacher. I have a teacher in my life. I have a child in school. I have a problem with a teacher. They do not hesitate to call their lawmakers and talk to them about issues that they're having. And those lawmakers will often take that into consideration and, and then often, hopefully, turn around and ask all of us, I'm hearing this is a problem. What's the extent of this problem and should we do something about it in the state of California? So lots and lots of people shaping education policy in the state of California. And sorry, I don't want to miss the bold sentence at the bottom there, because I'm actually very proud of this at our agency, if I can say that. The commission has a really great history of working with all of the thought partners in the state of California before implementing something. They have power and authority to say, we want to change our standards and we want it to look like that, but they never do that in a bubble in an authoritative role. We always, always, always reach out to folks, folks in the field, folks I like to say in the trenches, boots on the ground, like you all who are enacting these things, and get your best thinking on changes before the commission tries to make those decisions. And I really commend our commissioners for that. So the commission's specific role, what does the commission have basically authority to do in the state of California? So the commission can, how do I want to say this, sponsor legislation that would change education code. We would have to come up with a ledge idea. Our people in our government relations office would then go out with the commission's permission and seek authors for that and work with the authors. So the commission has in the past sponsored legislation. The commission can also take positions on legislation that can affect how those bills move forward. So that would affect statute or education code. Depending on what is in ed code, the commission sometimes has to then enact regulations. And the regulations are the piece that sort of define what goes in ed code. So if there are things in ed code that says something as generic as the commission shall issue credentials, we would then want to go into regulations and define what are credentials, what do they look like? Or, and I'm being really basic, thank God. Ed code is a little more specific than that often, but if there's anything that seems fuzzy or there's a gray area, we need to get that in regulations. The commission can also adopt standards. They have the authority to do that, and they have the authority to modify their standards whenever they see fit or there's call for that. The commission can set budget priorities. They can communicate those budget priorities to our executive director, who then can communicate those either directly to the Department of Finance and our friends in the legislature, or through government relations. But we have currently a very active executive director who does communicate with a lot of what I call our parent or oversight agencies like Department of Finance. And then of course, educator requirements, which typically are reflected through our standards, but the commission has authority over all of these areas. So just to talk a little bit about the commission in terms of who they are in the state of California, and David kind of alluded to this, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but we are one of, Mary can correct me on this, it used to be 13, might only be 11. Is it still 13? Yes-ish, okay. We're about one of 13 independent teacher preparation standard setting agencies in the 50 states of California. Most states have that single Department of Ed with an elected official kind of running them. But California, of course, likes to be unique. And so we have a Department of Ed, and then we have the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. As I mentioned, the commission falls into the executive branch of government in the state of California, which means, as I said earlier, we answer directly to the governor of the state of California. And when we have a governor like we do right now, who has some very clear vision for things like early childhood education, that can certainly influence and shape what the commission's priorities are during that governor's tenure. 14, as I mentioned, we have our commissioners are governor appointed. We have 19 commissioners. 14 of those commissioners are appointed by the governor, and then they have to be confirmed by the Senate. So there's a formal process for that. And the other 4 are, then there are 4 that are ex officio members that are appointed by the boards of the CSU Chancellor's Office, the UC, the AICCU organization, and the community colleges have a board member. And then finally, the superintendent of public instruction has a position or a designee, and typically it's been a designee from his office. So that's the makeup of our commission. And by the way, and I can't name what they all are, but of those 14 appointed members, they represent school boards, teachers, Services credentials, so PPS, like school counselors, school psychologists, they represent administrators, they represent public. So there are some sort of non-teacher, just public roles. So they, in the makeup of the commission, really, we have a pretty good representation of the various roles of educators in the state of California. All right, as I mentioned in Ed Code, and I think I kind of covered this, so as usual, I got ahead of myself. But the commission can enact changes in education code by sponsoring legislation, supporting, opposing legislation, helping authors seek amendments. I think one of our greatest roles, whether we take a position on a bill or not, is we become an information resource. We have a good relationship with, like, Chelsea Kelly, who you met yesterday, and other people in staff offices and in committee offices, and they will often reach out to us and say, hey, what do you think about this bill? What would the commission's position be? And I want to be very clear, because this question was asked recently. Only the commission can take positions on a bills, meaning the commission has to vote. They have to have, in a formal public meeting, they have to be able to vote to take a position on a bill. They only meet 6 times a year. So it doesn't always coincide well with when bills are first heard in hearings, because sometimes people will say, why is the commission not taking a position on this? They haven't had a public meeting. So for instance, policy bills are going to start being heard on March 23rd, and our commissioners don't meet till the 7th and 8th. So the best that staff can do in the background is say, these things look problematic, or they look good based on, what you're doing in Ed Code and what commissioner is working on. But we are very careful not to say, well, we think the commission would oppose this, or they need to have an opportunity to publicly consider legislation and take a public position on that legislation. And with that, I'm going to pass to Cheryl.
All right. Erin's taller than me. All right. So the other thing, how come this isn't moving? I am. It's just this one, right? It's not moving. Yes. And then do you have the thing, the clicker? I left it for you right there. There it is. Sorry. All right. So the other thing we wanted to talk about is the role of the commission. I tried to think about how to make a slide on regulations exciting, and it's pretty hard to do, but this is where a lot of the policy work at the commission level really happens. So as much as it's tedious to read regulations, I would encourage you to kind of think about, if there are regulations in front of the commission, this is a good time to really impact the language of the regulations. And so the commission has to implement what's in Ed Code. And so the way we do that, sometimes Ed Code's very clear, as Erin said, it's very specific, it's very clear. Most of the time it's not. And we not only have authority to promulgate regulations, but we have a responsibility to promulgate regulations to make it clear for the field and to make it enforceable. And so we have really have a very long list of regulations that need to happen, and a very small staff, as you all know. But we're working on regulations as fast and as quickly as we can. It's really important there that we work with all of you to make sure that the specifics around the regulations will work for you, and that the issues are sort of fleshed out before we have a regulatory package that goes to the commission. So oftentimes we'll ask you for some feedback, or we'll talk to you about, okay, here's what we could do in the regs, here's what we might be able to do. So this whole process is really important. As much as it sounds very tedious and kind of brain numbing, it actually is really important. And we know that when it comes back to, what does it actually say? What does the Ed Code say? And what do the regs say? We look at the regs almost daily for various things. So they must be noticed and go through the whole commission approval process. There is a very specific regulatory process with timelines that must be followed, and we have to follow them to the T. The Office of Administrative Law is the agency that approves. And in order to get regulations approved, one of the things we really have to do, and that's helpful to work with all of you, is we have to, have the authority to do it. So something in Ed Code has to give the commission either expressed authority to be able to promulgate those regulations on whatever topic it is, or there should be broad statements about the commission may do X, Y, or Z. So we always have to go back when you have an idea and we think about, oh, we could change the regs. We have to go back to, does the ed code allow the commission to have that authority? The other thing we have to do is we have to write up a necessity statement. So why do we have to do this? What is it that allows us to do it? And what is the compelling reason for doing that? And then the regulations have to be very clear. And many regulations are not clear. Drives me crazy. And it probably drives you guys crazy as you try to implement things. So specificity, necessity, authority, and clarity. Those are the big things around regulations. So when you see the work that we do, to actually implement some of the ed codes that you're like, okay, I don't know what this is going to say. We'll have to work with the commission to figure out how we're going to actually implement this. All right. And then the next one, what were you hitting, Erin?
Oh, just the down arrow.
Oh, the down arrow. Okay, great. And then that one. All right. And then budget priorities. We just wanted to mention the commission's role in and around the statewide budget priorities, not our own necessarily, but we don't have any direct role over, what the governor proposes or what the legislature approves in the end. And we do submit budget change proposals that are related to our own budget or to ideas that the legislature has that says, okay, how we want this to happen. How, what do you all need to make that happen? But we're often asked about, how much would it cost to do X, Y, or Z? So we have sort of an informal kind of a relationship with legislators as well as the governor's office, the Department of Finance, when they ask about certain initiatives that they have. And of course, in very flush years like this year and last year, we're getting a lot more calls about, hey, we have this idea. How much would it cost to implement that? And we'll have to go do those kinds of things. In tight budget years, those calls get very quiet. So the other way that we do a lot of policy work, as you all know, is around the standards or around requirements specific for the various credential programs. So we have a real key role in that policy development, as long as we are allowed to do it, as long as there's authority in ed code or in the regulations that allow us to do that. All the work is done in open public meetings. So if you are new to the commission, there is opportunity for everyone to have a public say. And after every agenda item, there's a presentation, and then they open it for public comment. So if you are interested in any particular item, please feel free to be part of that conversation. It's really important. And the role of this community is extremely valued by the commission. They listen to you. They send staff back to work on things until it sounds like, we're either at an impasse, which doesn't happen very often, or we have all kind of agreed on how can we make this work. So really, the commission values all of the work that you do and your perspectives. So please know that. And we want to hear from you on things. There's other things that we do. Obviously, we implement a variety of things, whether they be something that's in ed code or not. These are some examples of recent implementation, and you can all impact that policy work as well. Changes to the accreditation system that we underwent a few years ago. We're soon to be talking about moving RECA to the performance assessment. David's going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Changes to the ed specialist credential structure. You all had a lot of influence over that, right, Vicki? PPS we just finished. So the field is critically important to all of these policy changes. And, we seek to be collaborative, not only the staff, but we collaborate with all of you, as well as CDE, the State Board of Education Board, all the other entities out there, community colleges. So a couple of ways just to impact the commission's work: public comment at commission meetings, but not everybody's comfortable with public comment at commission meetings, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the place that you start. We actually prefer you to work with staff because we draft the agenda items that go to the commission. So if we hear from you or are talking to you about issues, we can kind of keep that in mind as we develop these agenda items. Participating in office hours, let me tell you, that has been amazing because we're listening to you and hearing what the issues are and hearing that, oh, there's several institutions that have an issue here that we need to be thinking about and making changes. Obviously, your involvement in like this CCTE as well as CCAC and other organizations has become really important. Volunteering so that you are aware of how things operate and you can make changes there. Again, we try to be really responsive to the extent we can. Letters to the association from associations or institutions to either the commission staff, the chair, the commission as a whole. You know, those are effective as well when we have items in front of the commission. But really, you know, I want to emphasize talking to staff. The more you can talk to us, the more we can try to take care of things. And if something has to go forward to the commission, we certainly can do that. Biggest thing I can tell you right now is to propose solutions. Don't just bring us the problem, because you guys know how to fix something. So you may be able to help us think about, well, how would we go about, or what are the numbers of, you know, maybe there's 3 different ways that we can handle this particular situation. We love to hear solutions. So help us think about the solutions, and we can figure out how we might be able to put those solutions to work, whether it's, you know, revamp the regulations, whether it's changes to commission policy, or whether we need ed code changes for something that you're proposing. So help us think through the questions that are out there and the possible solutions. So that's sort of us in a nutshell. I'm going to turn it over to David to start talking about some of the actual initiatives we're working on. And I don't know why this died. Okay.
I'm just a little taller than Cheryl, but not much. So what I want to do with each of these is give you a little bit of background as to where did this come from, in addition to what it's about. So the first one is the commission adopted a policy at the last meeting that for each credential area, so teaching, services, that only one performance assessment would be required. Now, where did this come from? This came from staff realizing that now that we're requiring TPAs for education specialists, who needs to take it? Do people who got their first education specialist credential years and years ago and want to add another one, do they need to take it? What about someone who has a multiple subject credential and they're adding education specialist credential? Do they need to take the education specialist credential? So what we asked the commission to approve, and what they did, was that TPA, especially now that we have aligned the kind of the Common Core, the universal design for learning, that between gen ed and education specialists, there's a tremendous amount of overlap. So if you've passed one, you're good. So the next step for us is to, and we've been working on writing the regulations, is to complete writing our first draft of regulations, share those with the public, and then send them to the Office of Administrative Law for approval. We expect that OAL will have things that they'll want us to correct. Sometimes it's simple things like punctuation, but other times they catch things that we missed in terms of, okay, but what does this mean exactly? So we can't, it's when we're doing regulations, it's hard to give preparation programs just broad discretion because regulations need to be able to be enforced. So next topic is universal transitional kindergarten and PK3. Where'd this come from? This came from the state's master plan on early learning. And the latest things coming from that are in the current state budget. Funding was provided for and requirements were made that all districts need to phase in universal kindergarten for 4-year-olds, so transitional kindergarten. Theoretically, we didn't need to do anything, and I bet Mary's cringing at hearing me say that. The reason why theoretically we didn't need to do anything is because the multiple subject credential authorizes the teacher to teach from pre-kindergarten through adult. So we have a credential for transitional kindergarten. Now, there's also some confusion about, well, don't they have to take 24 credits in early childhood education or child development? For credentialing, no, they don't. Someone who has a multiple subject credential would not be flagged as misassigned for transitional kindergarten because they are properly credentialed. However, the legislature created some other requirements for what's called apportionment or state aid. And in order for LEAs to claim state aid, on transitional kindergarten classrooms. Starting in 2023, the transitional kindergarten teacher needs to have done one of three things. First is completed 24 units in early childhood education or child development. Okay, and one of the things you're going to hear from me a couple times now is we need to use our close reading skills. Because in this context, what does a unit mean? It is not defined in that section of education code. The commission does not talk about units. We talk about credits from a regionally accredited institution of higher education. So this is a question that's kind of foggy out there. So that's one option. Another option is to complete 24 credits, so things that we know, in early childhood education or child development. Or if the teacher has been teaching in a TK classroom, the district can determine that they have the experience that is equivalent to 24 units. No standards for any of that. So, pardon me? Okay, I must have missed the CDP. So the child development permit is the third option. Thank you, Aaron. So even though we did not need to really do anything, as we've been working very closely with CDE on this, and their idea of it's not enough to just expand transitional kindergarten and also pre-kindergarten into preschool. We need to have a more seamless experience for those younger kids, so that it's not going from a very developmental play-based experience in transitional kindergarten to a very academic-based kindergarten experience. So CDE is working, and you will hear more and more about this over time about this universal TK or PK through 3 initiative. And so it makes sense for us to have a credential for teachers to focus on early learners. And there are many districts who would love to have their early educators with extensive training in what is developmentally appropriate for these learners. So we are creating, but we are not creating a new credential. We are repurposing an existing credential, which is the early childhood education specialist. So in the past, this has not been a base credential. We have a work group that has been meeting and will be making recommendations in April that it be a base credential. The work group has been working on TPEs, program standards, and a new authorization statement. So all this will be brought to the commission in April, as here's your first look at the big picture here, and then we'll bring it back to them in June. So this really is on a fast track. And part of the reason that this is on a fast track is the phased implementation of TK starts next fall. And the way that they're phasing it in is based on birthdays, but basically it's 25% more transitional kindergartners enrolled every year until 2025, 2026, when we're fully implemented. There have been a range of estimates on how many teachers we will need for creating this universal transitional kindergarten. And that ranges from 9,000 to 16,000 additional teachers. Additional teachers. In addition, there are going to be teacher to student ratios in transitional kindergarten that will either be 1 to 12 or 1 to 10, which means that there will be another, we need to have another adult in every transitional kindergarten classroom. So we're facing teacher shortages now. Well, we're gonna need a whole lot more. The next kind of policy discussion or issue that we want to share with you is the implementation of Senate Bill 488. The vast majority of people who have heard of Senate Bill 488 probably think about it, oh yeah, that's the requirement where RECA becomes a performance assessment. And you're right, that is part of it. But again, and this is the bill that you really need to do some close reading on, because there are certain words in the bill that mean we need to do things a little differently than we have in the past. So for example, when the agency has needed to include things like standards from the State Board of Education or documents that CTE has put out, like frameworks and things like that, the word we've used is align, that our preparation programs need to align to these documents and these requirements. That's not what this bill says. This bill says include. So one of the questions we're going to have is, what does it mean to include in both our standards and TPEs? Because the bill says standards and TPEs, for example, the dyslexia guidelines. We don't know. That's something that we're going to have to do over the next several months, because there is a deadline in this bill that says by September 1st, 2022, the commission needs to ensure that our standards and TPEs include what I'm conceptualizing as the parts of education code regarding effective reading instruction that have been there for a long time. So for you education code nerds, it's education code for, section 44259, sub B, sub 4, paragraphs A and B. Not that I've spent a lot of time with this. Another part of this is that the bill requires us to certify that all multiple and education specialists, multiple subject and education specialist programs, we need to certify before we require the new performance assessment that every program is teaching what is required in this bill. This is something above and beyond what we already do with accreditation. So we are going to have to work with all of you to, first of all, to help everyone understand what's required. Second, we need to pull together a work group to identify what needs to change in our program standards and TPEs. We need to pull together a performance assessment design team to start working on that so that it's ready to implement in 2025, and then figure out a process for us to certify programs. And it is really important for all of you to realize that there are interest groups, which we've talked about earlier, especially Decoding Dyslexia California, that has been very involved in this bill. So over 3 sessions, I think, is that correct, Mary? Over 3 sessions, they have worked to get to a bill that could be approved by both houses of the legislature and signed by the governor. We have had a couple of meetings with them recently, and I got to tell you, they've done their homework. They understand our accreditation system. They understand what's in this bill because they helped write it. So this is going to be a really important thing for all of us over the next several years. Yes.
A literacy TPA and the regular TPA? What do you foresee that looking like?
I don't know. That's a question for the design team. And there are some implications there, because do we, like for example, the RECA, there is one assessment for the whole state. Everyone takes the same assessment. However, we've got 3 different models of TPAs. Right. So are we going to have, let's say, another cycle that is the same for everyone? Or are we going to have each model sponsor come up with another cycle that assesses all these? We don't know. That's really something we're going to have to look into.
But the bill requires that this is a part of the TPA, not just a part of the program.
The bill requires, among the things that the bill requires is that the RECA be replaced with a performance assessment.
Okay.
And that the performance assessment assess effective literacy instruction, which is defined in 44259.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, some other policy issues that we've been working on are subject matter. So we presented to the commission and they approved a draft of emergency regulations to implement the changes in AB 130 regarding subject matter. The commission gave us some direction because there was not entire agreement on some of the majors. So we're going to be pulling together a work group to look at the majors that were included to ask, are those still appropriate? You know, I can tell you, kinesiology is one we have to look at because we've gotten a lot of feedback on that one. And then are there other majors that were not included in the emergency regulations that perhaps we need to think about? And one that was brought up at the commission table was ethnic studies. So is ethnic studies enough like a liberal arts major that it could meet the subject matter requirements for one or more credentials? There are also different ways to, different strategies to address the teacher shortage and diversify the educator pipeline issues. And I'm gonna ask Kara to come up and talk about those.
David is so eloquent. So hi, everyone. I'm lucky enough to hang out with these people who know everything there is to know about policy. It's not my bailiwick, but I have money. I'm Kara Mendoza. I'm with these wonderful people in the professional services division, and I oversee grants, examinations, and data visualizations. And I was just whispering to Cheryl, I should have left in all the grants from this year. I took them out, but I should have left them in. But she says, I bet you have them memorized. Indeed, I do. So we have this current budget year and through June 30th of 2026, $350 million for teacher residency grants for expansion and implementation. And of that $350 million, $25 million is for capacity building grants. Just last week, we awarded a little over $9 million for 39 LEA IET partners to build capacity around. Yes, we got rid of almost 10 million of that 350. We're so excited. We are so excited. And don't quote me on this, but I'm really hoping Friday, we're expecting the teacher residency expansion grant to be released. And then following that on the heels will be the implementation grant, most likely by the end of this month, if not sooner. So teacher residency is hitting the field. One thing I will say about the expansion grant that is coming out hopefully this week is that it's a really quick turnaround. And the thinking behind this really quick turnaround is that some LEA IET partners are positioned to start in the fall because they're already kind of rocking and rolling because it's an expansion grant, mind you. Okay, it's continuing good work that has already started. So don't go, wow, look at them. Look at this quick turnaround. Well, it's by design. Okay, it's by design a quick turnaround for folks that want to get moving. And there will be another opening of a release for expansion grant in April. And that will have a more normal timeline, sometime to be handed in sometime late summer, early fall. Okay, so we're on a quick pace and then we're also on a regular pace for expansion. Okay, we also have 125 million for classified grants, and we're hoping that that RFA comes out later this month. We're very, very close. It's just going through some internal review, and we're actually getting into the 21st century by having some of our appendices online. Isn't that amazing? We have an amazing, I know, who knew? Our technology department is helping us, and they are working miracles. We also have, is it 15 million, Tim, for computer science supplementary authorizations? And that will be coming out. He's like, what do you mean it can't come out this week? I'm like, hold on. So that's coming out also this month. And then last but not least, our 2 million for our IHE friends to include dyslexia into your coursework, reading coursework. And that is an opportunity to get a little money to do some work that, you know, rarely do you get money to do your work, right? I mean, above and beyond, of course. So that will be coming out also hopefully later this month. We are rocking and rolling in the grants world. Thank you very much. Woohoo! And because that's not enough, wait, there's more. So you heard yesterday from Chelsea about one of the opportunities, the AB 2401, which is bringing back the integrated programs. We're very excited about the potential of bringing back the integrated programs. And this particular bill will have an implementation piece to it. Okay, the last bill in 2016 was all about planning, and this bill will have planning as an opportunity and/or implementation, which might open up some doors to our candidates who might need a little, you know, a little support monetarily to do your programs. And then lastly, there is SB 577 with bringing our community colleges and IHEs together, and the concept of hosting, this was before COVID, imagine, the concept of our community colleges and our IHE colleges working together to host coursework at the community college. And this was a pilot program in 2019-20. That's right. We got out the door like January of 20. It was for 3 pilot programs, and this particular bill will open that up to for funding for 10 programs. So lots more coming in the grants world, and I'm with Cheryl. Talk to staff. Feel free to email me and/or our email boxes that are for each of the grants programs. So I'm going to pass it back to David. Thank you, everybody.
So as another example of how we can affect policy in small ways is it was a pleasant surprise to me that legislative staff contacted us about AB 2401 and asked for our feedback on how we might improve it. And I think one of the changes I like the most out of that is that Kara and Christina, who's our other grants person, suggested, well, let's look at what we've learned from our residency grants. And one of the things that we learned is that we've got a lot of programs who are actually, we didn't learn this yet, but it was in the requirements, and I know we're going to learn it. But one way that the residency grants are different this year is that they don't focus just on shortage areas. There's another criteria where residencies can be developed in order to develop the teacher pipeline so that our educator workforce better reflects the demographics of our school districts. So yes, thank you, Pia. So Kara and Christina suggested, well, as we're building ITEP programs, that should be another, in addition to the shortage areas, that's another focus that we should have. So we are hoping that that will show up in the final version of the bill. Then some upcoming things that we have fewer answers to. The first one is at the February commission meeting. Our certification division presented an item on credentialing occupational therapists and physical therapists. And this is an issue that has gone nowhere in the legislature over time. We thought it was going to go nowhere at the commission meeting. However, we had a lot of constituents show up speaking in favor of establishing these credentials. And it was not just practicing OTs and PTs. It was also individuals from IHE saying, yeah, we'd like to build programs like this. So that's something we're going to have to look at. the continuing issues related to COVID, especially the number of teachers who hold a provisional credential, but still need to pass TPA or RECA. And the impact that that is having on induction programs. Further added to that is, okay, I think we've done a good job, and I think all of you have done a good job of understanding what are the 4 requirements in Ed Code where it is still possible to recommend someone with a provisional, for a provisional credential when they haven't met one of those 2. Now we're starting to get, both in office hours and emails, some very detailed cases of candidates who have either had mental or physical or other health issues related to COVID. So it's not directly that they're just the buildings being closed affected them or prevented them from not completing the requirements. So this is something that, you know, we're going to need to work with you all on, and to try and understand exactly what Ed Code allows us to do and what Ed Code does not allow us to do in the up and coming cases. So for the rest of this term, but then what are we going to do over the next 4 to 5 years for the candidates who still need to complete these? And with RECA in particular, the further you get away from your reading coursework, the harder it is to pass it. And then, you know, many more legislative and budget sessions to come. I mean, we learned about bills yesterday at the same time you did. So that's just the way I guess it goes. So we've got some extra time. Nope, wrong button. There we go, for questions. You coming back up here? Sure.
Well, how about before questions, just some applause for our guests. I really enjoyed that. That was very, I think, you know, for many of us, we know this information, but it was good to have it just presented in such a succinct, comprehensive manner, kind of tying so many different parts of our last 48 hours together. So thank you so much for your effort in putting that together, putting it in sort of practical terms for late on a Tuesday afternoon. We really appreciate it. I know there's questions from the Zoomers, and I'm going to ask that disembodied voice to just, maybe Yesenia or Nicole want to feed us a question right now from the Zoom audience. Wonder if it can work that way.
Can you
Oh.
all hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat here. So what is the time frame for forming the expert panel for SB 488?
That's something we have discussed internally. I mean, we've got a group that's been meeting internally for several weeks now. I would say we need to get those groups meeting sometime next month. And the reason for that is because one of the deadlines for the commission is to report to the legislature by September 1st, 2022, that, you know, saying that our program standards and TPEs contain everything that's required by SB 488. We have to have changes to changes on program standards and TPEs to the commission during their August meeting so that they can approve them. So this is another set of work that's going to be moving quickly. The design team for the performance assessment is not as critical. We are working on getting a contract with a vendor to work on that, and the vendor usually does a lot of the legwork that we need to pull the committee together, the design team together, and start working on that. That probably will start sometime over the summer.
And will there be
David?
a call for that panel?
Oh, there will be calls, yes. There will be application processes, and we certainly will be letting all of you know about that.
Just to put a plug in, if you don't already receive the professional services division Friday update, multicolored. Pay attention to the stuff in red, especially. Then see one of these people and they'll tell you how to do it. Is there a question from the Metropolitan Terrace group here? Yes.
Sorry, quickly on the same lines, I guess this is probably for Cheryl. What's it going to look like for us to demonstrate that our institutions are doing these components, SB 488, in, I'm assuming prior to, like in 23, I'm guessing is when you're looking at, because we have to go through university policies to change at the university level to get approval for the syllabi before we can then share them with you.
So my ideal timeline, and this is in the context of, there's actually 2 deadlines for the commission regarding different parts of Ed Code 44259. One is for this September, the other is September 1, 2024. My ideal timeline has been, let's put all the changes together, get those approved now, this year, so that programs have 2 years to go through their process, because we understand it can take you 2 years to get things approved. And then the process to certify programs would happen in 2024, 2025. But that may be too ambitious. So the less ambitious plan that we have is to, at our August commission meeting, present the things that are required to be in program standards and TPEs this year, and then have that work group continue working so that it may, it may take a couple extra months to develop the rest of the changes in standards and TPEs, so that perhaps by the end of the calendar year, you all will know what you need to do. But yeah. So Cheryl's saying one of the requirements is that we need to certify programs before the performance assessment goes into effect, which is 2025. So that's why we're thinking 2024, whatever that certification process is going to look like, that's when we'll do it. And it's it's going to be another one of those things where we can't wait until it's, year in the cycle to do that. We have to certify everybody. So there will be something extra for 2024, 2025.
Let's see if there's another question from the Zoom room. Just wanted to click on that chat button, but I don't have a clicker. Okay, if there is not, then Kate?
For all those many candidates who finish everything except for the RICA before 2025, so they're like finishing their program, is the RICA going to continue to be offered for them to take the RICA to
Great question.
Yeah.
So the ones that we're most concerned about, the candidates we're most concerned about, are actually the candidates who are finishing in 2024, 25, because they're all going to have to have taken it at least once. And so the question is, do they have any kind of catalog right to that exam? So this is not a definitive answer, but it may be that we continue offering the RICA as is for those candidates only through, the end of 2025. But, it's going to be a challenge if we keep that exam open to make sure that everyone who is supposed to be doing the performance assessment doesn't try and do this one instead. So that's one of those questions we need, what happens for these candidates who have failed it, and if they get to that point, what happens to them? We will develop very clear directions for programs to use, but that is a question we've been thinking about already.
Okay, we do have some questions. Is there a holding place or a site where all the bills regarding teacher preparation are located?
Oh God, I wish.
It's called Bill Tracker, and then you can put in like random words. Teacher preparation, substitute teacher.
That's a great question because tracking bills is a huge piece of the work for our ledge staff. So in my mind, one of the things that we could do is, so Chelsea ran off a list of bills yesterday. If you go to legeinfo.legislature.ca.gov, which is the bill tracker, and put in those bill numbers and you want to A, B, or SB, because it's going to make a difference, you have an option there to click track bill. And then you can click, actually, you can choose what you want to be tracked. Do you want to be notified every single time something is changed on the bill? Or do you want to be notified when it goes to a committee or something like that? So you can sign up for that. You give it your email address and they'll send you notifications directly. So there's that.
Thank you.
But like one challenge is I was yesterday years old until I learned that a thing called spot bills. And someone from CD had asked us for some feedback on a bill that the state superintendent's going to sponsor. And they sent a bill number and I look at it and it's on nursing. And it's like, did you send me the right bill number? But not school nursing, So it was a spot bill.
Because it put you on the spot. Okay, we have another question from the chat and then we'll take a question from the room. And before I actually pose this question, it is worthwhile to get on the CTC website and sort of get access to the sort of generic emails. And then you can email some of these questions to the appropriate person, like about grants or about credentialing or that kind of thing. And they're very, very quick to respond.
And if you once you subscribe to the PSDE news, at the end of it is a list of contacts for more specific programs.
Yeah. Okay. Will the multiple subjects credential change with the TK3 credential, or will our students choose one or the other?
At least initially, this will be something new where we'll have credentials with overlapping authorizations. So your students will have to choose whether they want the full multiple subject to be able to teach, basically all of elementary, but, also further up, or if they want to specialize. And, back in Wisconsin, we had a group of teachers. There had been an early childhood credential for a long time. And there were a group of teachers who really just wanted to teach the younger learners. That was their passion. And I think we will find that will grow here in California as well. And I think, having been a principal, if I were an elementary or especially a primary level principal, I would want to be hiring those people who are specifically trained with those younger grades.
Thank you. Any other questions from the room? Yes, Steve.
Hi, everyone. First, high praise for everyone on the commission staff to be able to see things at a 30,000-foot level and then down to the units, include verbiage, and what does that really mean? Just takes really unique individuals. So I applaud your work. I think two areas where you also have a lot of influence on policy that maybe you didn't address here was one on data. So for example, being able to track where the candidates originate from, particularly from not just IHEs, but maybe even from community colleges, would be very helpful for us to show the case of how all the different segments in higher education actually feed the teacher preparation pipeline. And so I'm not sure of what would take in order to try to help get to that point, but would happy to have conversations with you. And then the second point is really related to the regulations related to the funding. So I see all the grants that Karen mentioned, they're wonderful grants, but I'm not sure if it's dictated by statute who has the ability to apply for the funding, or if that is controlled within CTC. So for example, the integrated programs that came around, 5 years ago or so, the money went to the CSUs, right? And it was very limited in terms of just building the framework. So the community colleges didn't really have a place to be. We were added as, included into the development of the programs, but to receive funding, that was a limited piece. So I'm not sure, again, that the language of how you write the RFA influences how the money gets distributed and utilized into the field. And then the second piece of that is also reporting on those integrated programs, the community college partners, right? So I always see in the CTC that it's the universities that are reported as the the group that, received the funding and I worked on the programs, it would be wonderful to include the community college partners. So then we could share with our legislators and others, like these programs are not just from Cal State Long Beach or Cal State Northridge, they're in conjunction with this community college and this community college. That would really benefit all of us in that process. So particularly in those grants as well. So thank you.
I'm going to try and answer those in reverse order. So that's a great suggestion for us to include reporting on which community college partners are on each of the grants that we run. So I think that that's something that we can do. Kara, did you want to answer the one about who gets the money? Who can have?
Those dry RFAs we write are straight from Ed Code and budget language. I'm a much more flowery writer than that. Just saying, former English teacher. Anywho, and to your point, Steve, David was kind enough to wrap up my little section by saying, indeed, we were approached by the legislator's office to talk about ITEP. And one of the first things Christine and I said was, in the first go around, the partnership with community college, it was kind of, I don't know, did it really happen? Did it not happen? And so we really wanted to make the impression on the legislator's office that that is somewhere we can strengthen our ties between our IHE, our four-year colleges and our community colleges. So I have you in my brain, Steve, for reals. So I can just say that much. But yes, it's straight from Ed Code, what you can spend your money on, what you can't.
And then Steve, your first question was on data. Quick question for the room. How many people have heard about the Cradle to Career data system? This does not surprise me. So a new state government agency was created. It's called the Cradle to Career Data Agency or Office of Cradle to Career Data. I'm actually on the board, but the idea is to get data from a number of different state agencies plus higher education so that we can look for trends and patterns among the development of Californians from the cradle. So from their early childhood education experiences, their pre-K experiences, all the way through their career. The biggest challenge that the Cradle to Career program is facing and will face is getting legal agreements on what data can be shared and who can share it. But the goal down the road, Steve, is that as a researcher, as just a member of the public, you can go to this source of data and be able to get data across agencies. So that, it's really more about the question that you have and you'll be able to get the data, hopefully, that you need, rather than having to figure out which agency might have the data that you want and is it in the form that you need. So it is going to take a couple of years at least to stand up this data system, but I think I'm very hopeful for the future of it.
I think we have one question from the Zoomers. Clara, did you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you. As a new term, Zoomer, I didn't know that. Good afternoon, everybody. Clara Amador-Langster from National University. Thank you for your presentation. Very informational, very needed. My question has to do with RICA and the new performance literacy assessment that we are currently looking at. And so my question goes to look at what is going to be, have there been any discussions or conversations about not just literacy, but biliteracy, bilingualism and biliteracy? In other words, with the shortage of bilingual biliterate teachers we have in this state and the fact that we now are in a wonderful position with the newly adopted bilingual program standards and the newly adopted bilingual TPEs, where is the conversation at a policy level, 30,000 feet, regarding the assessment of literacy and biliteracy for bilingual teacher candidates in the state? Thank you.
Great question. So as we are looking through SB 488, one of the requirements is that the commission include in its standards and TPEs several state documents, and one is the ELA ELD framework. So we think that that is going to have a lot of influence on down the road what is assessed in that TPA. But that multilingualism is certainly something that we're looking at. And one of the things that we're learning through the process is that while SB 488 might have been driven by people who would align themselves more on the foundational skills, dyslexia side, that there is this whole other side regarding bilingual, multilingual literacy that really needs to be a part of that.
If I may
So-
just add, sorry to interrupt you.
Sure, no
While
worries.
the ELA and the ELD framework addresses the needs of English learners, it does not necessarily directly address the needs of biliterate learners, dual language learners. I was wondering you could comment on that.
I think we've gone beyond my depth in understanding of those frameworks. So one, I would recommend that when we put out that application to be part of the work group or part of the design team, that you seriously consider that, because we do need some of our colleagues from higher ed who are just steeped in this area to help us understand what needs to be done. And even if something isn't in SB 488 right now, we're opening up our standards and TPEs. That doesn't mean we can't add something in addition to what's required in SB 488 if that's what we think needs to happen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will certainly consider it. Thank you.
So I think with that call to action, so get your PSD e-news, and when there's an opportunity to volunteer for a committee, please do. It's sort of like CCTE all over again. You get to really think through issues, you get to bring your expertise to the table, and I think you also just come to appreciate how the state works, and which policy levers you can influence as a teacher educator.
And we've also heard from a lot of people that it's a really good professional learning experience.
Yes, certainly. So thank you all very much. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your expertise.